Ever felt like your house was falling apart? Well, wait until you see these homes that have been standing for over 50 centuries. We're diving into ancient dwellings so well preserved you could move in tomorrow. If you don't mind stone furniture, of course. Stick around to see which of these spots became a legendary movie set. Smash that like button, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Which city are you watching from? Let's get into it. 10. The Mesa Verde cliff dwellings in Colorado. On the opposite side of the world from Pompeii, we find one of the most intact groups of ancient homes in North America. The Mesa Verde cliff dwellings, located in Colorado, were built by the ancestors of the Pueblo people between the late 12th century and the early 14th century of our era. The big secret to the preservation of these stone houses is that they were built under overhanging cliffs, remaining protected from the elements, rain, and snow for centuries. We are not just talking about isolated houses, but entire communities. Some of the most famous sites like Cliff Palace, Balcony House, and Spruce Tree House consist of dozens of rooms, towers, and ceremonial spaces known as kivas. Despite their impressive scale, the dwellings were made with sandstone blocks joined by a simple mortar of mud and water. Individual rooms served as living spaces, storage areas, and work sheds. Interestingly, the hearths and ventilation systems found there show an advanced knowledge of airflow and fire safety. As for the kivas, which are circular underground chambers, they were likely used for both ceremonial and community purposes. To move between the levels of the houses and the surrounding mesa top, residents used ladders and handholds carved directly into the cliff rock. When the ancestors of the Pueblo people left the area around the end of the 13th century, possibly due to a prolonged drought, the structures were abandoned but remained virtually untouched. Modern archaeological study began in the late 19th century, and in 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt established Mesa Verde National Park. Today, the site preserves nearly 600 cliff dwellings, offering a direct view of how these people lived, organized, and adapted to such a challenging landscape. It is impossible not to admire the engineering of these people, who decided to live literally hanging off a canyon just to have a premium view and natural stone air conditioning. You probably needed the fitness of an Olympic athlete just to get to the kitchen, since climbing up and down those cliffs every day could not have been a task for everyone. At least they never had to worry about noisy neighbors upstairs, unless it was a mountain goat taking a wrong turn. 9. The Skara Brae houses in the Orkney Islands. Way up north in Scotland's Orkney Islands, we find one of the most extraordinarily preserved prehistoric settlements in all of Europe. Skara Brae is a cluster of homes built entirely of stone, dating back to roughly 3,180 years before our era. What makes this place a literal time capsule is the fact that it remained buried for centuries under sand dunes, which shielded the structures from erosion and human vandalism. When a devastating winter storm in 1850 revealed stone walls along the coast, the settlement was gradually uncovered, offering one of the clearest glimpses into domestic life during the Neolithic period anywhere in the world. The site consists of about 8 dwellings connected by roof passages. Each house was built with flat stone slabs fitted together perfectly without any mortar, yet in such a brilliant way that they have lasted for more than 5,000 years. But what is truly mind-blowing are the interiors. The stone furniture is still there, in the exact same spots, including beds, dressers, and storage bins. And make no mistake, these aren't modern reconstructions. They are the original pieces carved from local stone that have bravely survived the ages. Most of the houses follow the exact same architectural blueprint. A central hearth provided light and heat for the residents, flanked by 2 stone beds built against the side walls. Occupying the place of honor opposite the entrance was a sort of stone sideboard or shelving unit, where household objects like pottery or stone tools were displayed or stored. Niches in the walls suggest that organization was already a priority in the daily lives of those people. To protect themselves from the harsh weather and freezing winds, the houses were partially sunk into the ground and covered with turf or seaweed, creating a natural layer of thermal insulation. The preservation of this site is almost entirely due to its natural burial. After the settlement was abandoned, possibly due to climate change or the relentless encroachment of sand, the houses were filled and sealed by protective layers of dunes. Today, the site is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most visited attractions in Scotland. Walking through Skara Brae is the closest we will ever get to time travel, seeing the hearths and furniture that Neolithic families used 5 millennia ago. It is funny to note that even 5,000 years ago, humans already had this obsession with keeping everything organized in shelves and cubbies. The design was rustic, I will admit, and sleeping on a stone bed does not sound like the peak of comfort, but at least they never had to worry about termites in the furniture. If the Wi-Fi worked in there, a lot of people today probably wouldn't even complain about the raw stone minimalist decor. 8. The Houses of Catalhoyuk in Turkey. In central Turkey, we find one of the most significant Neolithic settlements ever excavated in history. Catalhoyuk was occupied from approximately 7,100 to 6,000 years before our era, and is often considered one of the first known cities of humanity. What brings this place to our list is the survival of dozens of mud brick houses, many of them intact enough for us to reconstruct exactly how families lived more than 9,000 years ago. The houses of Catalhoyuk were built right up against each other, with no streets between them. You might be asking yourself, how did people get into their houses? Well, they moved through the settlement by walking across the flat roofs and using wooden ladders to climb down through openings in the ceiling. This unusual design gave the community a structure similar to a honeycomb, which likely helped with defense against predators or enemies and made efficient use of space. Inside, each house followed a standard plan. The rectangular rooms had plaster walls and floors, which were often painted and kept spotless for generations. Central hearths provided heat and space for cooking, while raised platforms along the walls served as seats, work tables, and sleeping areas. Decor was taken seriously. Walls were sometimes painted red or adorned with animal reliefs. A fascinating and somewhat curious detail by our modern standards is that the dead were often buried under these sleeping platforms inside the homes. This suggests that the residence served as a spiritual space and a long-term family lineage site. Wall paintings, figurines, and symbolic objects found inside show that, for these people, the home was the center of everything, from practical life to a connection with the sacred. Imagine the chaos of getting home after a long day of hunting and having to climb over your neighbor's roof, dodge someone else's chimney, and go down a ladder in the dark just to reach your living room. Not to mention that sleeping on top of your ancestors gives a whole new meaning to the term family home. If we complain about walking up 2 flights of stairs when the elevator breaks today, imagine what these people would think of our laziness. 7. The Viking longhouses of Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. At the northern tip of the island of Newfoundland, we find one of the most significant sites in all of North America. Meadows is the only confirmed Viking settlement on the continent, dating back to around the year 1000 of our era. The site preserves the remains of the so-called Nordic longhouses, which were rectangular buildings made of sod and wood, serving as homes for the settlers who briefly established themselves in this icy region. It is important to note that the structures at Meadows are not reconstructions, but original remains. Excavations beginning in the 1960s revealed the outlines of 8 buildings, including 3 large halls, several smaller dwellings, and workshops. The houses were built with wooden frames covered by thick layers of earth and grass sod, which provided essential thermal insulation against the brutal cold. The foundations, the hearths, and even the marks from the wooden posts remain intact, clearly showing how the Vikings built their homes. Inside, central hearths provided light and heat for the narrow, long spaces, which likely accommodated several families. Benches or raised platforms along the walls served as sleeping areas. Artifacts like iron nails, rivets, and a spindle whorl indicate that the inhabitants worked on ship repair, blacksmithing, and textile production. The largest hall measured nearly 28 meters in length, a scale comparable to houses in Greenland and Iceland from the same period. This proves that the Norsemen set foot in the New World nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus ever dreamed of leaving port. Imagine the look on a Viking's face arriving in Canada and thinking, "The weather is terrible and it snows all the time. Perfect! Feels just like home." They were so practical that they built grass houses that looked like an extension of the garden, which must have been great for insulation, but terrible if someone decided to let a hungry goat loose on the roof. At least they didn't have to worry about mowing the lawn, since the lawn was the living room wall. 6. The Villa Romana del Casale in Sicily. Back to Italy, but this time far from Pompeii. The Villa Romana del Casale, located near Piazza Armerina in Sicily, is one of the most spectacular examples of a preserved Roman residence. Built in the early 4th century, it is world famous for its extensive mosaic floors, which cover more than 3,500 square meters and remain almost entirely intact. The villa likely belonged to a very high-ranking aristocrat, possibly linked to the imperial administration. The complex includes several courtyards, reception rooms, private baths, and luxury apartments. The mosaics depict everything: hunting expeditions, mythological narratives, and detailed scenes of daily life. One of the most famous shows, young women in athletic poses wearing what look like two-piece outfits, known as the Bikini Girls Mosaic, practicing sports like running and weightlifting. Another highlight is the Great Hunt Mosaic, which runs along a long corridor and shows the capture of wild animals destined for Roman arenas. The miraculous preservation of these mosaics is due to a landslide in the Middle Ages. Instead of destroying the villa, the debris sealed the floors and protected the art from exposure to the elements and wear and tear. When excavations began in the 20th century, archaeologists found everything in exceptional condition. Roman heating systems, with suspended floors and water channels, are still visible, revealing the level of technological sophistication of the era. It is impressive to note that 1,700 years ago, the Romans already had gyms and sportswear that have nothing on today's world. The owner of this villa was so rich that he basically had a high-definition silent movie spread across his entire floor. Walking through there must have been such an intense visual experience that a guest probably forgot to even talk, just staring at the bikini girls or stone leopards while trying not to trip over their own tunic. 5. The cliff houses of Matmata in Tunisia. In southern Tunisia, the Berber village of Matmata is known for its troglodyte houses. These are dwellings carved directly into the earth, many of which have been used continuously for centuries. Dug into soft sandstone, these houses represent one of the most distinct forms of ancient domestic architecture in North Africa. Each house starts with a large circular pit, sometimes more than 10 meters deep and about 15 meters wide. Around the perimeter of this pit, rooms are hollowed out into the walls, creating rings of chambers connected to the central courtyard. The origins of these houses are difficult to date precisely, but some suggest they may have emerged in the Roman or Byzantine periods. What is certain is that they were built to adapt to the extreme environment, using local materials that required no imported resources. The rooms serve as bedrooms, storage rooms, or even animal shelters, while the central courtyard provides light and fresh air. These houses gained international attention in the 1970s when they were used as locations for the movie Star Wars: A New Hope, serving as the model for Luke Skywalker's childhood home. Visitors can take tours of the traditional homes, some of which have been converted into guest houses or cultural displays. The continued presence of families in these dwellings shows that ancient construction techniques can be sustainable even in the 21st century. If Luke Skywalker could live there and still dream of piloting starships, imagine the thermal comfort of that place. It is basically living inside a giant hole, but with all the charm of architecture that ignores the existence of bricks. The only problem must be if someone decides to kick a soccer ball in the upstairs backyard and it falls straight onto the dinner table 30 feet below. Other than that, it is the perfect hideout against the scorching desert sun. 4. The Domus Aurea in Rome. Nero's Domus Aurea, or Golden House, is often remembered as a colossal imperial palace built after the Great Fire of Rome in the year 64 of our era. Although much of its ostentatious beauty, like gold leaf, rare marble, and jewels, was looted after Nero's death, parts of the palace's domestic spaces survived underground, incredibly intact. Even though it is much larger than a common house, the preserved sections maintain the essential layout of Roman domestic architecture taken to the imperial level. These preserved rooms are located beneath the modern city of Rome, having been buried when later emperors decided to fill the palace with dirt to build the Baths of Trajan on top. Ironically, this burial guaranteed the structure's survival. Today, it is possible to walk through corridors, dining halls, and smaller chambers that display remains of frescoes and stucco decorations. The decorative schemes here, executed in the so-called fourth style of Roman painting, offer one of the clearest windows into the interior design of the elite of that time. The walls feature mythological scenes, landscapes, and fantastical architectures, often framed by delicate plasterwork. Renaissance artists like Raphael and Michelangelo studied these frescoes when they were rediscovered in the 15th century, which eventually inspired the grotesque style of decoration in European art. Currently, the Domus Aurea remains partially open to visitors, offering the rare chance to enter an ancient Roman domestic space preserved right beneath the busy streets of the Italian capital. Nero definitely was not a modest guy. The man built a house so big he almost needed a map and a chariot just to get from the bedroom to the kitchen. The funny side is that the following emperors tried to wipe the palace off the map by covering everything with dirt, but they ended up creating a perfect time capsule. If Nero knew that his little golden house would become an inspiration for the greatest artists in history 1,500 years later, he would probably be bragging about it to this day. 3. The Taos Pueblo houses in New Mexico. On a high desert plateau in northern New Mexico, we find Taos Pueblo, one of the oldest continuously inhabited communities in the United States. These multi-story adobe houses have been the home of the Taos people for more than 1,000 years, and many of them remain intact today. The buildings are made of adobe, which are simply sun-dried mud and straw brick, stacked into thick walls and coated with additional layers of mud plaster. The multi-story design gives the appearance of a stepped apartment complex, with houses reaching up to 5 stories. Traditionally, entry to the upper levels was through roof hatches accessed by wooden ladders, a design that offered security against invaders and great insulation. Unlike many ancient dwellings that became mere archaeological sites, Taos Pueblo was never abandoned. Its preservation is due to continuous use and regular maintenance, with residents reapplying the mud plaster every year to combat the wear of time. These thick walls regulate temperature perfectly, keeping the interior cool in the summer and warm in the winter. About 150 people still live permanently on the site, maintaining traditions while balancing modern needs. Interestingly, electricity and indoor plumbing are not permitted within the historical structures to preserve the authenticity of the architecture. Living in a house that needs a mud facial every year sounds like an endless job, but the result is a building that has already lasted 10 centuries. It is the kind of condo where you can't complain to the manager, because the manager is probably your spiritual great-great-grandfather. And let's be honest, having to climb a ladder and enter through the ceiling every time you come home with groceries is the best cardio workout anyone could ever invent. 2. The monastic houses of Skellig Michael in Ireland. Rising out of the Atlantic Ocean, about 12 kilometers off the coast of County Kerry in Ireland, the island of Skellig Michael is home to some of the most fascinating and well-preserved ancient houses in Europe. In the early medieval era, around the 6th century, a group of monks decided that life on the mainland was too busy and moved to this isolated rock, building stone huts known as beehive huts that remain practically perfect today. These structures are called beehives because of their rounded shape and construction method. Using stones quarried from the island itself and without using a single drop of mortar, The monks stack the stones in horizontal layers that gradually slant inward to form a domed roof. This technique distributed weight so efficiently that it created completely waterproof shelters, capable of withstanding the furious winds and relentless rains of the Atlantic for more than 1,400 years. Each hut is small, measuring between 2 and 4 meters wide on the inside. The space was used only for sleeping, praying, and storing the bare minimum needed for survival. The community was self-sufficient, relying on small chapels, cisterns to collect rainwater, and terraced gardens where they grew their own food in the middle of the hostile landscape. The impeccable preservation is due to both the skill of the builders and the total isolation of the island, which prevented the stones from being stolen for other buildings over the centuries. If you think your commute to work is hard, imagine the monks who had to climb hundreds of steep stone steps in an Atlantic storm just to get to the kitchen. Skellig Michael is so surreal that it even served as a setting for the recent Star Wars movies. But the true force here is human resilience. Building a house that doesn't leak and doesn't fall down, using only loose stones on top of a cliff in the middle of the ocean, is the ultimate level of engineering and faith that anyone can achieve. 1. The troglodyte houses of the Bandiagara Escarpment in Mali. The Bandiagara Escarpment in central Mali is home to one of the most extraordinary landscapes of preserved ancient dwellings in Africa. Built into cliffs that stretch for nearly 150 kilometers, the troglodyte houses here reflect centuries of habitation by the Telem people, and later, the Dogon. Many of these houses, perched perilously on the cliffs, remain intact despite their age and exposure to the desert sun. The oldest dwellings date back to the Telem, who lived in the region between the 11th and 16th centuries of our era. Their houses were built using mud, bricks, and wood in locations that seem almost inaccessible. It is believed they chose these spots for defensive and religious reasons. When the Dogon people migrated to the region in the 15th century, they built their own villages at the base and in the crevices of the cliff, often reusing or adapting the structures left by the Telem. The granaries, with their conical thatched roofs, remain a distinct part of the village layout. Because they are built well above the valley floor, these houses were protected from erosion and flooding, and the dry climate helped prevent any decay of the wood and mud. Many of these structures still function as homes today, providing a continuous link between the past and the present. Living in a place like this requires an enviable sense of balance. Imagine waking up half asleep and remembering that your porch leads straight to a 300-foot abyss. The Dogon and the Telem turned the concept of living on the edge into a literal lifestyle. The upside is that no one is ever going to knock on your door trying to sell you an internet plan or an encyclopedia, because just looking at the climb, any salesman would give up on the spot. Which of these ancient homes blew your mind the most? Drop your city in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more. Keep the journey going by clicking on the videos appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next one.